Good morning, Your Honor. Barry Lucia on behalf of Mr. Gregor. Mr. Rodriguez is not with me this morning. Mr. Gregor is seated.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Gregor. Defendant appears in court appropriately attired with suit and tie, although today we do not have the jury present. Mr. Gallucci, we discussed yesterday, we wanted to at least utilize this day for certain hearings outside the presence of the jury. Would you put on a record what you intend to do today?
So, Judge, I have two witnesses today. They're Mr. Gregor's parents, David and Carolyn Gregor. They're going to discuss their testimony is basically to set up how Corey came into their life, where Mr. Gregor was at that time, when Mr. Gregor moved out, and then the events that took place between March 20th and April, I guess it would be 3rd. That's basically what they're going to call to testify.
Thank you. And the state wants to have this hearing because you're concerned about whether or not you received a full proffer and what testimony may come out in front of the jury and whether it will be admissible or not.
Yes, Judge, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Gallucci, you can call your first witness.
We call David Gregor.
Thanks, sir.
Okay.
Hi, sir. Come on in.
Please remain standing.
Please raise your right hand, sir. Before we will swear you in.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, have a seat, please. Please state your full name and spell your last.
David Gregor, Gregor.
Mr. Gallucci.
Thank you, Judge. How are you, Mr. Gregor?
Hanging in there.
Okay. Are you married?
I am.
Okay. And what's your wife's?
Carolyn.
Do you have any children?
I have 4.
Okay. And can you tell us who they are?
My oldest son is David. He's 35. The next in line is Kimberly. She's 32. Then it's Christopher. And then my son Daniel's 28.
Okay. Now, how old is Christopher?
Born in 92, so it's 31. I know the birth dates. I have to do the math on the ages. It constantly changes.
So I'm going to direct you to August of 2017. In August of 2017, did you know of Rebecca or Brianna or Corey Micholo?
I didn't at that time.
Okay. So when was the first time that you knew of them?
I received a call in late 2017, early 2018. I forget exactly what month it was. And it was from a lady that identified herself as Rebecca Michiola.
And after you received that phone call, did not tell me what she told you, but after you received that phone call, did you have conversations with your son?
I did.
Okay. And what did you discuss with your son?
We discussed the nature of the phone call, and that was that they believed Christopher was the father of a young boy.
Okay. And after you spoke to your son, what was the next time that anything dealing with Corey and Bicholo was done?
So Christopher was away, and he was coming back that weekend. My daughter at the time was still living with us. And so when she came home from work, I had a discussion with her about the nature of the phone call. She knew the name, but didn't know anything about Chris being a potential father of a young boy. Within a day or two, Kimberly produced a document that she was on social media and brought it down. I believe it was from Topics, which I'm not familiar with. But the gist of that was a conversation between people that strongly suggested that Christopher wasn't the father.
Okay. Now, you said that Christopher was coming home for the weekend. In August of 2017, where was Christopher living?
Christopher was living in Baltimore.
What was he doing? If you know, what was he doing?
Christopher was in the Johns Hopkins program for his master's degree in education with the urban teachers. So he was attending school, and at the same time, he was being mentored in the classroom to teach.
Now, did there come a time that you heard from this person who identified as solid
Objection,
waste?
Judge, hearsay. That you heard it from the person, like,
Did you receive a phone call?
Yeah, I don't think he was gonna ask for the content of the
Okay.
conversation.
I
right?
wasn't.
Okay.
Did you receive a phone call from a person, again, who identified themselves as Rebecca Piccolo?
I did.
And how long in time was it between the first phone call you received from this person to the second time you received the call?
The second call was weeks later, because then subsequently there was a third call. But the second call was a few weeks later.
Now, after you received the second phone call from this person who identified herself as Rebecca Piccolo, did you have another conversation with yourself?
I did at some point. The second conversation was very short with Rebecca.
Did there come a time when now Corey Michelo became part of the Gregor family?
There did.
Okay, and do you recall when that was?
Corey's first visit was in the beginning of August of 2019. It was just a visit for a couple hours. I remember it because Christopher went to pick him up. And it was a big day for us. It was my only grandson. He came for a couple-hour visit, and the preparation of everything at the house was about Corey. I remember going through I had 4 children, they all played sports, so I was going through all the old equipment now that the children were older and pulling out all kinds of balls and baseballs and footballs. And
So you met him at that time. You testified that he was your only grandchild at that time.
yes,
So at that time, your children were all older.
they were.
So now, did there come a time when, besides a visit, that Corey became, it became more than just visitation? And by the way, where did you live at this time?
We lived in Monroe.
And that's here in New Jersey.
It is, Middlesex County.
So did there come a time where it became more than just he came over for a visit?
August 28th was the next visit that I remember, and I believe that was ordered through the court. At that time, it was close to him beginning overnight visits. So we actually had set up a bedroom for him and did everything we could to prepare for him to arrive. But there was so much more than just the tangible things to get ready, because there became some serious discussion in terms of what we needed to do to prepare for him based on the dialogue that I had had with his grandmother.
Now, when you say, without telling us what that dialogue was, what are some of the things that you did to prepare for Corey now moving in or having more contact with him, overnight visits? What were some of the things that you needed to do?
Well, school hadn't started yet, so it was everything in terms of making his life comfortable. It was what size clothes did he wear, what food did he like, what were his hobbies, setting his room up so he was comfortable, because he really didn't know us very well. So it was everything to make him comfortable to live with us, all his likes. And it was during his visits trying to get that information from him without sitting down and browbeating him in terms of everything he liked, everything he didn't like. It was just spending the time with him and getting a feel for what we could do best for him when he arrived.
Okay. So now this is just overnight visitation at this point.
In the end of August, yes,
So did there come a time from August 28th of 2019 that overnight visit became greater than just overnight visit?
it did.
And what was that?
I believe it was October.
Okay, and what happened in October that changed?
In October, Christopher had filed for custody the way I remember it. And he became the custodial parent. And so with that, Corey began to live with us. And I say live with us, it was for a certain time period. It was Mondays through Thursdays. Then he would go back to his grandmother's house on Fridays after school and then come back to us off the school bus on Monday. There's times where that was changed based on holidays, based on vacation. So it seemed, I'm going to say changed often. It wasn't steadfast. It did change. But in our minds, he was living with us and he would visit with his grandmother.
Okay. So when he was living with you, were you working?
I was. I'm self-employed. I set my own schedule. And part of our plan to accept Corey into our home was that I could do such where I could make my schedule, because Chris was teaching at the time. So
When you say Chris, you talk about your son.
Christopher was teaching at the time in Camden. And we knew that in order to take him, besides the challenges we had in front of us, to make him most comfortable and to assist in his learning, I thought it best if I could be there almost during all his waking hours. It didn't always happen that way, but for the most part, it involved getting up very early with him. My wife was reporting to the office at the time with her job, and my wife would make him breakfast. If Christopher was still home, which was a rarity during the first 3 months because he was leaving at 6 a.m. So Corey went up, he either took a shower the night before, or he took a shower that morning, and it was me that monitored him and helped him get dressed. And when he came down for breakfast, I mean, it was a total commitment. He'd come down for breakfast, I'd go through his book bag, and we'd make sure all his assignments were there, his lunch was ready, anything for school that he needed. And as soon as he got off the school bus, which dropped him off right in front of our house at about 3 o'clock, I was there to meet him off the school bus.
So you went from grandpa to almost father.
We often jokingly said that, we just had our fifth child, and it wasn't for a lack of commitment from Chris, but it was our game plan as a family to do the best that we could for him.
Now, when you first were introduced to Corey, did he live somewhere other than Monroe?
He did.
Do you know where he lived?
He lived in Jamesburg.
Okay. Do you know if he went to school there?
He did.
Okay. Now, when Chris became the custodial parent, did you change the school system?
Changed the school within the first few months, yes.
Okay. And where did he now go to school?
He went to Monroe schools and he went to Barclay Brooks School.
Okay. So, had your children went through that school system?
They all did.
Okay. And were you familiar with the school system?
Very.
Okay. And what did you do as a grandparent or father with respect to that, his education?
Well, part of the
Briefly.
I was totally involved in his education. Monroe has a system by which you can go online, and much to my other children's chagrin during their careers in the school, I was on there every day. And I was on there checking for assignments, checking for grades, checking for, in general, how he was doing. He had some classes that were more of a challenge and blocks of instruction than others. The teacher, in fact, would make notes and put it in his book bag every night about how he did that particular day. And I know that's one of the first things I did when I got him off the school bus. I brought him in and let him unwind. And I'd open that up because it was, did Corey have a good day or did Corey have a bad day? And it seemed in Monroe that most of them were good days. There was an occasional bad day. And a bad day usually was defined by focus issues, being disruptive, things like that, that had manifested itself in a larger degree when he was still in Jamesburg from all the things that I had read. So I was totally involved with his education, from not just perusing online in terms of how he was doing in school, but going through his book bag, doing lessons with him. I tried to do as much as I could before Christopher came home because he was doing the same thing after dinner with him.
So now let me bring you to January of 2020. Prior to January of 2020, did Christopher and Brianna Michelot basically share custody?
They did. It was called shared custody.
Okay. In January of 2020, did the custody change?
It did.
Okay. And what changed about the custody?
Christopher, I believe it was on January 28th, was given full custody.
And when Christopher received full custody, where did Corey live then?
With us.
Okay. So you were still living in Monroe.
Yes.
And up until the time Corey died, if you know, did Brianna Michelot ever regain custody?
No.
So between January of 2020 and March of 2021, how long was Corey in Monroe?
They moved to Barnegat in, I think the date was August 28th of 2020.
Now, between January of 2020 and August of 2020, did Brianna have visitation?
There were periods she had visitation.
When you say there were periods, what do you mean?
She had lost the ability for visitation in the beginning. I believe it was the end of January 2020.
Okay. And do you know when she regained visitation?
I don't remember that off the top of my head.
Was it prior to Chris moving to Barnegat?
Yes,
So let's get to Chris moving to Barnegat. When was that?
August 28th, 2020.
And do you recall why he moved to Barnegat?
I do.
What was that?
Well, Chris was concerned that as grandparents that we were assuming a burden, if you will, of the load of raising Corey. And we obviously were quite ecstatic with being able to help out. And Chris shared with us the need to be able to raise him by himself. And at the same time, trying to find a school system that would be good enough for him. We had many a discussion when he chose to leave, because not only did we not want Corey, having just known him for a short amount of time, to leave, but we felt as if Chris down in Barnegat was going to be unprotected.
So now, from the moment you met Corey until the moment Christopher moved to Barnegat, did you ever see Christopher mistreat, abuse, or hit Corey?
Never.
Have you watched the Treadmill video?
No,
Okay, why not?
because I don't want to see. I don't want that to be my remembrance of Corey, that he was mistreated in that single instance on the treadmill.
Now, between March 20th and April 2nd, 2021, did you have any conversations with Christopher?
We did.
Okay, what did you discuss?
Well, we actually,
Objection, Judge, it's hearsay.
So what exactly are we doing here today? We're doing a 104 hearing on whether any of this testimony is admissible?
Right.
How was any of it admissible?
Background.
But how was, coming across like a loving grandfather who's obviously cares deeply for the child, but how are those things even going to come in front of the jury?
Well, it's a background to some extent of how this child came into their life. I think.
Well, yeah, the timetable is one thing, that's fine. It already came out I believe, to the jury. The defendant wasn't aware when the child was born and things like that, but, I have a lot of concerns. Chris moving down to Barnegat will be, quote, unprotected. That's all opinion testimony, that's conspiracy theory testimony, so the rules of evidence don't really apply at a 104A hearing, because this is not a hearing on the admissibility of defendant statements. So you can ask things that involve some hearsay, but we need to have some parameters because we can't be doing this in front of the jury. What about the issue of this defendant testifying that his hearsay knowledge of custody orders? Don't we use the order? Because he just testified that the mother did not regain custody. There's an exhibit that she regained joint legal custody on October 28th, 2020. So I'm not going to allow hearsay testimony, particularly incorrect hearsay testimony, when we have an exhibit that says something else. So you need to give me a focus on what you're intending to accomplish here.
Now I'm intending to accomplish the events between March 20th and April 2nd, and April 3rd, actually,
All right. Well, why 2020 though?
21.
Okay. All right. Well, that's obviously a relevant time period.
And that's what I was just asking.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So between March 20th, 2021 and April 3rd of 2021, did you have conversations with your son?
We did.
Did you discuss Corey?
We actually went down to see them
Okay.
on March 22nd.
And on March 22nd, where did you go see him?
Well, my wife had set up a viewing at two homes that we were discussing with Chris purchasing down in the Barnegat Bayville area.
So you went down to visit.
We did.
Okay, and what, if anything, did you, Corey, Christopher, and your wife do?
Well, we spent about 3 or 4 hours down in total. We visited two homes, walked through the homes with Corey, discussing, setting up bedroom. What, would the house be able to accommodate everything that they wanted to do for Corey? Was there a bedroom for him? We looked at two homes. We had discussions with Chris about the pros and cons of all the houses. And then subsequent to that, we went down to my brother-in-law's house in Barnegat,
And who's your brother?
Michael Anderson.
And you, Corey, Chris, and your brother-in-law's family all together?
We were.
And what, if anything, did you guys do together?
Well, we spent, I think it was about an hour in the house talking about mainly Chris and Corey and what we were trying to accomplish down there. And my brother-in-law already lived down there, and he has some opinion about the area, and as well as we did, because we were very familiar with it.
Okay. Now, did there come a time when you saw any bruising on Corey on that day?
We did.
Okay, where did you see the bruising?
I saw a bruise on his forehead.
Okay. And did you or your wife speak to Corey about the bruise?
We did.
Okay. Was it you that spoke to him or your wife?
Both.
Okay. What, if anything, did you
Yeah.
say to Corey?
What happened? And Corey said, I fell on a treadmill.
Now, between March 20th and April 2nd, did you have any contact with Brianna Micholo or Rebecca Micholo between those dates?
No.
Let me direct you now to, by the way, what was Corey's demeanor on that day you saw him on March 22nd of 2021?
Well, when we were looking at the houses, he was excited. He did a lot of running through the homes. And when we shared with him, he knew we were looking for a house for them. And so he had many different questions. Where would the dog be? Where would I go? That kind of thing. But he was energetic. I wouldn't say he was focused. I think it was a lot for him to take in, but he was very excited about it. In between visits, he was out running in the yard, and he was energetic.
Now, did there come a time on April 2nd of 2021 when you heard from Christopher?
There was.
And about what time was that?
It was sometime after 3.
Okay, and can you tell us what happened?
Well, the first calls I got that day were from my wife, saying that Chris was taking Corey.
Objection, judge, is hearsay.
So, that's permitted at this hearing. It's
Right,
not-
I don't
agree it's
know.
Hearsay, but,
You want us to wait at the end to,
right.
Okay.
You're not waiving anything, but
right,
at a 104A hearing, hearsay is permitted. So, but obviously, if you're going to seek to admit this, you're going to have to give me some kind of exception, right? Which would apply, and I have to hear from the state, and make a decision on that.
thank you,
For
Judge.
now, go ahead.
Okay. What did she say?
My wife said that Corey was being taken to the hospital by Chris.
And what's the next thing that happened?
The second call from my wife. And I'm in the car, I'm driving home. And it was Corey is going to the hospital or at the hospital, I forget which, and that he was bad.
Okay. And then, now what happened?
And then the third call was that he passed.
And who was that from?
My wife.
Did you have any contact with Christopher that day?
We did.
Okay. You have contact.
Well, the contact started with my wife. I'm driving. I went home, I picked my wife up, I'm driving. I'm listening to the conversation because it was loud between my wife and Christopher.
Okay. On April 2nd of 2021, did there come a time when you got to Southern Ocean Medical Center?
Yes,
Okay. And about what time was that?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Before you arrived there, did you call any police department?
I did.
Which police department did you call?
I looked up the hospital in terms of the venue. I believe it was Stafford, and I called the PD.
And why did you call them?
Chris was hysterical at the hospital, and in the conversations I was listening to with my wife, it didn't seem like anyone was there with him. And so I said, well, aren't the police there? And my wife would ask him, and he said, well, no one's here. And so I said, well, hang up and call the police. So she hung up, I took the phone, and I called the police department, and I told them what I believed to be happening, everything I knew. And the police officer asked me, what do you want me to do? And I said, well, I imagine you would contact somebody if the hospital hasn't already and send somebody there. And that was the gist of that conversation.
Now, when you got to the hospital, was Christopher there?
No,
Do you know where he went?
I don't. I know that he had left because I had talked to him twice, I believe, on the ride down after I called the PD.
Okay. Did there come a time on April 2nd that you heard from your son, Danny?
There was.
Okay. And without telling us what he told you, what, if anything, did you do as a result of what he told you?
We communicated with Chris. Again, I was driving. I'm not sure if the communication was through a phone call or a text, but it was my wife letting him know what was happening at home.
Okay. And do you know what was happening at home?
I know what I was told.
Okay. So did there come a time after April 2nd that you saw things being done at your home?
There was.
Okay. Can you explain that?
Well, there was a long period of time where it appeared that vehicles were watching our house, sitting out in our cul-de-sac. And it happened quite a few times before I decided that I needed to take some kind of action.
Okay. Now, when you say take some kind of action, are you retired law enforcement?
I am.
What did you do in your career that you retired from?
I did various things. My state police career ran the gamut from being in a special operations unit for 6-7 years, emergency management, homeland security, so all types of law enforcement. When I left, I oversaw in homeland security New Jersey's critical infrastructure, the RERP program, Radiological Emergency Protection Program in the state, force protection for the state of New Jersey for all types of disasters and for threat level orange.
So when you say you took things into your own hands, what, if anything?
Well, I alerted the police department what was going on.
When you say the police department,
Monroe Police Department.
go ahead.
I was aware, people were sharing with me what was out there in terms of information being put out.
Well, did you see any of the information being?
I did.
What did you see? You physically see?
I saw numerous wanted posters, wanted for murder posters of my son.
So when you say a wanted for murder poster, what was the poster of?
It was a poster of Chris with wanted for murder.
Okay. Was it a picture of him?
It was.
And can you describe for us what that picture looked like?
The picture had the one that I saw had a jail bar superimposed in front of his face.
And where were these pictures located?
They were located on social media.
Okay. Were they located anywhere in your neighborhood?
There came a time where there was various postings put up in our neighborhood, on our neighbors' vehicles and on the street lamps and poles surrounding my house.
Now, prior to that, when you spoke to Danny, that's when these events were beginning to happen.
That was the beginning.
Okay. And did you convey that to Chris?
I did.
And by the way, do you know where Chris was at that moment?
I don't know exactly where he was.
Okay. Did you tell him to come home?
I did.
Okay.
I started with, don't leave.
Okay.
Because he was at the hospital at the time during a couple of the conversations. And I said, I'm getting there as fast as I can. I don't go.
Did there come a time that he was gone and you had a conversation with him and he was coming back?
Yes.
And what was that?
I want to say it was the next day was the next conversation. In terms of his commitment to come back, I don't know if it was the next day or the next night or morning, but there was a time where he made the conscious decision to return.
Okay, and that was when, April 3rd? If you remember.
It was either Saturday afternoon or Saturday night. There were many calls back and forth.
And were you involved in trying to make the arrangements for him to come back?
I was.
Okay, and what did you do for that?
Well, I mean, initially it was no more than encouraging to come back. He had his vehicle, he had the means to get back. And then subsequent to that, he was detained. And so there were other arrangements had to be made to get him back.
Okay. And were you instrumental in helping him with those arrangements to get back?
You know, we made many phone calls in terms of being able to get a rental car.
Okay. So how long was he gone?
I think it was about a day and a half.
And when you returned, where did you return to?
Our house.
Okay. And did you move back into your house?
He did.
While Christopher was away that day and a half, did you have any encounters with Brianna, Rebecca, or any of the Mitchell people?
The first time that I had a encounter with Brianna was sitting out in front of my house, but I don't recall the exact first time. There were many times.
Did there come a time when your house was vandalized?
There was.
And when was that? Do you recall?
Well, there were actually a couple incidents leading up to the night that we actually had to physically follow them from our development after I witnessed them throwing things at the house. So there were two incidents where it was with a car pulled up in front of the house. Two people got out. As I told the police, and it's in the report, I told the police because I was sitting upstairs watching TV so I could see right down the cul-de-sac. And two people got out, were throwing things at the house. And when the police officer came, he said, "Do you know who it is?" And I said, "Well, I'm 99% sure who it is, but it was a little dark, so I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. But I did give him names."
Okay. Did there come a time when they actually did vandalize your house?
So there was.
What happened?
Well, at that point, I was alert because there had been a few times of cars out in the front of the property, and then subsequently there was throwing nail polish and things. So now we're alerted to the fact that we need to be on guard. So I was sitting in the living room the night that they came down the street and began to throw things at our front door and broke a window and threw dead fish and ham hocks and goose egg stones and the like.
Did you make Christopher aware of these things that were going on?
He was aware of everything.
I have no further questions.
Any questions?
I do, Judge.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Gregor, in regard to what you were speaking about before in terms of the custody of your grandson, Corey, custody had been going back and forth between Corey's grandmother and your son, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of the changing of this custody, I mean, you were not a part of that, correct? Like you weren't at the court hearings, correct?
I attended one of the court hearings.
Okay, and are you aware of the full range of information regarding to what was happening between the custody issues in family court?
To the degree that DCP&P shared and that Chris kept a file on all the court orders. And so I was familiar what they all said. What I wasn't familiar with was DCP&P reports, with the exception of one that they happened to leave at the house when we called them and interviewed us.
Okay, so are you aware then that in October 28th of 2020, that there was custody granted between your son and Brianna?
I'm aware that the language that was shared with me in terms of custody, because I asked this question of the workers when they came, when Corey was.
Well, I'm not asking you about the language that was shared. I'm asking you, were you aware specifically of that order?
I'm not sure which order it is.
Okay, the order that I just said, the October 28th of 2020 order where custody was granted between the defendant and Brianna, were you aware of the order?
I was aware of a shared custody order, but I don't remember the date.
Okay, so at that point in time then, as you just said, then there was a shared custody order between the defendant and Brianna, correct?
That's the language that was used, yes.
Okay, so previous to that then, the custody arrangement had been going between your son and Corey's grandmother, correct?
Correct.
And during this time period, Brianna was actually never had custody of Corey, correct? It was between the grandmother and the defendant.
All the court documents that I saw was Rebecca Michelli versus Brianna and Christopher Gregor.
That's correct, thank you. So during the time period when all this was going on, there was a period of time that your son actually had lost custody of Corey as well, correct?
There was.
Okay. So Corey came to live with you when he was in kindergarten school year, correct?
If that corresponds with his age at the time, I don't remember if it was kindergarten or first.
Well, you just testified before that you were so involved in his education, correct?
I was.
So if you were so involved in his education, yet you didn't know what school year he was in?
What I knew was his curriculum, his assignments, and his evaluations.
Okay. So there was a time period then which you were so involved in his education, yet you didn't know what grade he was in, that Corey came to live with you, correct?
Correct.
And during that time frame, Corey was also visiting with his grandmother, correct?
Correct.
And then at that time, it's actually not custody, but your son had residency over Corey, correct?
I think the term that was shared with me by DCP&P is he was the custodial parent.
Okay. So in, I believe it's August, right, of 2020, then Corey and your son moved to Barnegat, correct?
Correct.
And when they moved to Barnegat, they at that time had left living in your home in Monroe, correct?
Correct.
And at that point in time, the defendant and Corey, you were no longer so involved in Corey's care, correct?
I was involved to every degree I could be living in Monroe while they were living in Barnegat.
Oh. And while the defendant and Corey were in Barnegat living, you weren't having daily contact with the two of them, correct?
Between my wife and I, it was pretty close.
You weren't going to see them every single day traveling from Monroe to Barnegat, correct?
We didn't see him every day, no.
Okay, and obviously you were not present during all the times that the defendant and his son were together in the apartment in Barnegat, correct?
No, I wasn't there all the time.
Okay. So the night of April 1st, right, of 2021, you weren't in Barnegat that evening, correct?
No,
And you weren't with the defendant and Corey that evening, correct?
correct,
And you didn't go to Jersey Shore Hospital, correct?
correct,
And you didn't go to the pediatrician, correct?
correct.
And you did not visit your son later that evening or see Corey that evening after Corey returned that morning, correct?
Correct.
So anything that was going on April 1st of 2021, you learned that from your son, correct?
I also learned it from my wife.
Right, so you have no firsthand knowledge of any of the events that transpired on April 1st of 2021, correct?
I wasn't there.
So calling your attention now to the day that Corey passed, you had spoken to your son while he was at the hospital, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And your son had spoken to your wife on the telephone at approximately 4:54, correct?
Spoke numerous times.
Okay. And based upon this conversation, you and your wife then began to travel down to the hospital, correct?
We did.
And Corey was pronounced at approximately 5:03 p.m. that day.
Okay.
So are you aware that he was
Question?
pronounced?
I don't know the time of pronouncement.
Okay.
No.
So you're not sure about that? Okay. So you actually called the Stafford Township Police Department at about what time?
I don't recall the time.
Okay, but you were on your way down to the hospital when you called,
It
right?
was.
And when you called while you were on your way down to the hospital, you called this in as a unintended death?
I didn't use that terminology.
Didn't you tell Detective Mitchell in a statement that you gave to him that you called it in because it was an unattended death?
Again, I'm not sure where that terminology is coming from.
Well, didn't you say that you were aware of the terminology because of your experience in law enforcement?
I don't believe I used unattended death. What I described to the detective was that, well, I described what was relayed to me from Christopher, and that Christopher was at the hospital when Corey passed. I'm not sure the words, I know what an unintended death is, but I don't know that I ever used those words.
Okay. So
You
you,
saying unintended or on?
unintended,
Unintended, not on, I didn't know you said on.
unattended,
You and I.
A, unattended, yeah.
We know the child died in the hospital, so
Yeah.
he was cross-examining whether you use that term.
Yes,
All right, good.
exactly. Thank you, Judge. So when you got to the hospital, your son wasn't there?
No.
And do you know when your son left the hospital?
I don't know the exact time now.
But that would have been before you arrived at the hospital, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so in the time between when your son had left the hospital until you arrived at the hospital, Corey was at the hospital alone, correct?
yes.
Now, you've testified about this incident, about somebody throwing eggs or when did that happen?
I believe it was August, if I remember what the complaint, August 26th?
Okay, so,
2021.
Yes, sir.
okay. So that would have been 2 months after Corey had passed, correct?
August to April?
Oh, it's the following August. So how long after was that?
No, it's that August, August of 2021. Corey passed in April.
Right, so that's my question for you.
Well,
So-
it's numerous months,
Numerous months, correct?
correct?
Okay. And you said before that there were signs put up and all of these different things. You didn't see who the people were who actually put these up, correct?
We did.
You saw who put them up?
We did. My
And again-
daughter, my wife, and myself.
Okay, and that would have been after Corey passed, correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, we don't have any further questions.
So, Ms. Linto, on her cross-examination, you said there came a time that Christopher lost custody, right?
Correct.
Do you recall when that was?
I do.
And do you recall why?
I do.
Tell me.
On February 13th, I believe it was, of 2020.
Tell us what happened.
Well, I was in the house, and Christopher came out of his bedroom upstairs and shared with me some dialogue was having with Brianna. And the gist of the dialogue was she was beside herself, that she at that time was not allowed to visit with Corey any longer. Apparently there was a court order stating same, and she was concerned, and she was apparently, according to Chris, crying on the telephone, and the texts were very emotional, that she thought that she could no longer see her son. So we had a long dialogue about it.
When you said we had a long dialogue, who was the dialogue between?
My wife and I and Christopher. Well, it was basically to say that Chris had custody. And I said, Chris, you have custody. And you tell her what I told Middlesex Court only a couple months ago. And that was, she's the mom. She should have every right to see her son, provided she complained. And I know why she lost custody. But I said, you just have to tell her to calm down. I said, and don't think about doing anything to placate her at this point. Let the court system play out as it will. So this went on for about an hour or so.
And you went to bed?
Went to bed.
And what was the next conversation you had with Christopher?
Next conversation I have is the next morning.
What was that?
Well, apparently he had decided after we went to bed that it was a good idea to go and see Brianna, to make her feel better about the current situation and to lay her fears that she's lost the ability in the future to see her son.
And what happened to Christopher?
Well, as Chris recanted the story and as I've read the successive police report, Chris goes to meet Brianna. The police are called for shots fired. As a result of them arriving and Chris being there with Brianna, they search his vehicle. They find marijuana paraphernalia and they place him under arrest.
And as a result of that incident, did Chris lose custody?
He did.
And how long did he lose custody?
I believe he lost it by the court paperwork that I saw February 14th and regained it a month or a month and a half later.
And did Brianna have custody when Christopher regained custody?
Again, the custody part confuses me a little bit, the shared custody versus full custody and shared custody with visitations. My understanding was no, based on the documents I read.
Now, on cross-examination, Ms. Linto brought up an October 28th, 2020 custody hearing or order. Was Christopher living in the house at that time?
In October of 2020, no, he moved out. in
So,
August.
go ahead.
In August 28th, he moved out.
So now, Ms. Linto, on cross-examination, directed your attention to August 26th of 2021 as the incident where they threw dead fish, goose egg stones, and what was hock? Ham hock?
Ham hocks is the way it was explained to me.
Now, prior to August 26th of 2021, how many incidents were at your house and when did they start?
Well, the incidents at the house started almost immediately upon Corey's passing. Started with a visitation from Rebecca. very quickly after Corey passed. I wasn't there for it. She engaged my son Daniel.
okay?
She engaged him in a,
By the way, when that happened, where were you when you received the call from Danny?
I believe I was in the car at the time.
Going where?
See Chris
Where?
at the hospital.
So on your way to the hospital, you received a phone call from Danny that Rebecca Mitrolo was at your home.
Correct.
And are you saying that's where this all started and it ended on August 26th when you decided to prosecute Brianna, Rebecca, and her other justice for Corey cohorts?
I don't know that it ever ended. August 26th was the last time that someone vandalized my house. And in this case, it wasn't because I saw them. But other types of threatening and harassing behavior has never ceased.
And you communicated this Rebecca encounter with Danny, Christopher.
Well, not only that, there were threatening calls to my house almost immediately.
And did you convey that information to Christopher?
We did.
No further questions.
I do, Judge. So you're saying that Rebecca came to your home on April 2nd, correct?
Correct.
And that would have been after Corey passed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when she came to your home, you weren't actually at your house, correct?
I wasn't.
Okay. And your other son was home?
He was.
Okay. So at that period in time then, your son had already left the hospital, correct?
I don't know that he had left the hospital grounds at that time.
Okay. But at that point in time, you had already spoken to your son at the hospital, correct?
I spoke with him numerous times that day, both
Right.
before and after.
And you were aware though, right, from what you said before, that he had left the hospital at some point because when you got there, he wasn't there, correct?
I knew when I arrived that he was gone.
Okay. So when Rebecca came to the house, that would have been after their family was notified that Corey had passed, correct?
I don't know how she was notified.
Okay, but the timing when she went, that would have been about after 6 o'clock or around 6 o'clock, correct?
I don't know when she was notified.
Okay, so you don't know the time that she went to your house?
I don't. I wasn't there.
Okay, so you weren't there at the house when this happened, correct?
Correct.
You're not sure about the time.
It was after Corey passed.
Okay, but besides after Corey passed, you're not sure if it was 6 o'clock?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure if it was after 6 o'clock?
I'm not sure of the time.
Or you could have been at 10 o'clock that night?
I don't believe it was at 10 o'clock.
Okay, so again, you're not sure, but it would have been before 10 o'clock, correct?
It would have been sometime after, within a reasonable amount of time. It wouldn't have been 10 o'clock.
And in terms of this egg throwing incident, the police actually didn't file charges regarding that incident, correct?
The eggs and the rocks and the things that broke our window, no,
All right.
they didn't file any charges.
Right, you actually went down and filed a civilian complaint, correct?
We actually had to chase them out of the development and identify them and call the police and call them to the scene, at which point they interviewed them.
Right, but again,
And then I had to hire a lawyer to sign a complaint.
right, because the police did not sign charges regarding the case, correct? Or regarding what had happened, correct?
Yes. They would
Thank you.
not.
Now, after Corey passed, you spoke to Detective Mitchell from the prosecutor's office, correct?
I did.
And when you spoke to Detective Mitchell at the prosecutor's office, you never said anything about you being bothered, correct, by the family?
Bothered by the family?
Yeah, about Rebecca or any of these things when you spoke to the police?
I don't recall.
Okay, so when you were sitting down with the officers after this happened, what information wasn't important to you, correct?
What was important to me at that time was recanting the 2 years of struggles that led to this incident.
Okay. And again, when you spoke to the police at that particular time, in particular, Dennis Mitchell, you had told him, quote, "It's an unattended death. And, you're gonna send somebody over or," correct?
I don't remember using those words, but the gist of the conversation, you're saying my discussion with, you're saying my discussion with the detective or the call to Stafford?
I'm saying when you had a discussion with the detective, when you were speaking to him, you used the words, "It's an unattended death," and, you're gonna send somebody over or "I should have known it was Barnegat." Didn't you say that to Detective Mitchell?
I'm not sure of the context there.
Okay,
I'm not
well, I
sure
can
that it's
show you
Barnegat.
I'm now gonna-
If what you're referring to, what it sounds as if my call to Stafford,
Sir,
where
referring to the statement you gave to Detective Mitchell, Ms. Lincoln, would you please show it to him?
Sure, Judge.
It refreshes his recollection that the prosecutor took the statement.
Your Honor, we're gonna mark this as S-160, if I may approach. Thank you. And if you can, I'm gonna direct your attention to that particular set of paragraphs.
Well, first, you recall giving a statement to
Yeah.
Detective Mitchell?
a very long statement, Your Honor,
Right. Were you truthful in that statement?
as truthful as I could be.
So then please look at the part that Ms. Lento's asking you to review. What's the question, Ms. Lento?
Okay.
So do you recall?
It's possible I used the word. What I was referring to and the gist of the whole conversation here was that the police weren't there and that my grandson had just passed away. And are they sending someone to the hospital?
Right, and you used the words, "It's an unattended death," correct? That was the question.
Well, that's what it says. And if that's what I said, I don't remember saying it.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. No further questions.
What's that?
Do you remember using the word unintended as opposed to unattended?
I don't remember using either word, to be quite honest, but in the context of what I just looked at, it was my whole idea of calling Stafford Police Department was to get a police officer to the hospital because Chris was distraught and I was concerned for his well-being. I just had a grandson that passed away and I didn't know that no one at the hospital was talking to us. So I thought to call the police department and say, "Hey, are you aware that this is going on? Somebody needs to get down there." So whether I used unintended or unintended, I don't remember. It was a very long conversation with the detective and I was getting everything out that I could in terms of what just happened.
Okay, so your concern, and correct me if I'm wrong, I hate saying that, but your intention was that you were under the impression that your son was distraught at the hospital, you weren't there, your wife wasn't there, he was by himself, and let me please send somebody there to at least be there for my son.
Absolutely.
No further question.
Just one further question. So when your son, actually, Your Honor, can we have a sidebar, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Second, correct.
Yes,
And that's a Friday, to your recollection?
I believe it was.
Is it refresh your recollection that maybe Good Friday?
It was Good Friday, he was off from school. Yes,
And that's, in this case, there's been testimony, that, in fact, that's why the DCP&P office wasn't open, because it was a legal holiday, that Friday. So you go to Southern Ocean County Medical Center, your son is no longer there. You've since learned, obviously, that he left the state and was stopped in Tennessee, right?
yes,
You testified to Mr. Gallucci that at some point you're telling him to come back.
the entire time.
All right. And you said, I believe at one point, that by Saturday night he was gonna come back. So Saturday night would be April 3rd, right?
Yes.
What do you know on your personal knowledge is happening at your residence in Monroe between the time you find out Corey's passed until Saturday night? What do you see or observe at your own residence?
Well, physically at my residence, or because what was going on is a lot of folks were sharing me information.
I get that, I understand that, but the problem with that being admissible is somebody telling you something is hearsay then, and Mr. Gallucci can call that other person to say it. But so
Well-
Danny's telling you stuff that Rebecca shows up, right?
Danny's telling me stuff that there are a couple phone calls. Rebecca comes.
But,
Um,
but you're not there when Rebecca's there,
I'm not.
and you're not receiving those phone calls.
Well, there were calls to my cell phone, but I don't recall the exact time of those because they never stopped.
And I understand that. And then any vandalism to your house between the night of April 2nd to the, say, midnight, April 3rd.
No. What was being shared with me, however, was a lot, and hard copies being sent, they were sending them electronically, our friends, of what was out there being posted all over social media.
Which was what?
Chris was wanted for murder.
Arguably true though, right?
Oh, I didn't know.
I mean, he was ultimately charged with murder, so you know that statement that he was.
Not that night
No,
or
of
the
course
next
not.
day, but that's what was being developed, and that was circulating through social media. And those are the posters that I saw online with him behind bars.
In response to that, you're telling him he should come back to New Jersey.
I still told him to come back. I said, you need to know this is out there, but you need to come back
And when he came back, where did he go?
to our house.
Thank you. Any further questions in light of my question?
Yes, Judge. You just told the judge that friends were sharing with you social media posts. Did you physically see those social media posts threatening him and your family?
I saw them all.
Okay. And how did you see
Either I opened up what they were sending me, whether it was a text or an email, or after a while, when I wouldn't look at it any longer, my wife was insistent upon showing them to me because they were consistent. They continued to go throughout those first few days. Well, they never stopped.
Still get it out?
Occasionally, since the trial started, there's a conscious effort to scale that back.
Judge, there's no further questions. We'll just make our arguments for relevancy, okay?
so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you. All right, counsel, are you getting on a break, right?
2 minutes, Judge.
Yeah, all right, so
Thank
we'll
you.
just take a brief recess. So while we're doing it, do you want to go to Mrs. Gregor first and then make your arguments? You want to
Yeah,
go individually per witness or?
We should do it all, right? Let's make them all.
We will defer to the court, however.
Well, you're not waiving anything by.
No, that's fine, Judge. We're totally fine with that. Thank you.
All right, we'll take a short recess. We're right back up.
Thank you.
All rise.
Yes, I do. Thank you. So have a seat, please, and state your full name and spell your last name.
Carolyn Gregor, Gregor.
Mr. Galucci.
Just again. Good morning, Ms. Becker.
Hi.
Are you the mother of Christopher Gregor?
I am.
Um, Did there come a time in your life where you knew you had a grandson,
Yes.
okay? And what was that?
2019.
And that's Corey.
Corey, yes.
And when you learned of this, did there come a point in your life where Corey Mitchell moved into your home?
Yes.
And that was in Monroe?
Yes.
And did there come a time when Corey moved out of your home?
Yes.
And what was that?
August of 2019, 2020.
Now, let me direct your attention to the time frame between March 20th, 2021 and April 3rd of 2021. Between March 20th of 2021 and April 3rd of 2021, did you see your grandson?
Yes.
When was that?
March 22nd.
Okay. And can you tell us about that?
Yes. Chris was interested in purchasing a home. So we had, I'm a real estate agent, as Chris was, and we found 2 homes in the Barnegat area, Bayville, that area. And we went, myself, Chris, Corey, and my husband, we went to go see the homes. And then afterward, we went to visit my brother for a little bit. He lives in Barnegat. And then we went out for dinner.
Where'd you go to dinner?
I think it's called the Sunset Marina. It's in Barnegat.
Now, during the day, at any point, did you notice any bruises, contusions, abrasions to Corey?
Yes.
What did you observe?
He had a bruise on his forehead.
Did you ask him about it?
Yes.
What did you say?
Where did the bruise come from, Corey?
And what happened?
And he told me he fell on the treadmill.
Now, you were with him the whole day on March 22nd? From
It-
what time to what time?
Approximately 4 o'clock till about 7:30.
Okay. And during that time, from 4 o'clock to 7:30, what was Corey's demeanor?
He was fine. He was energetic. He actually got me scared at one of the houses because it was a little close to a main road. And we were outside and he was excited and running around. And I was like worried because there were cars and trying to keep him contained while Dave and Chris looked at the house. He was just his normal, fun self.
Okay. What was Christopher's demeanor?
He was fine. He was, looking at the house. He really wanted to find a house for him and Corey and their dog Peyton. And he wanted to be in a good school district. So he was excited to try to find something. So, he was very interested in looking at the house and whatnot.
Now, between March 22nd now and April 3rd, did you see Corey?
I did not.
Did you see the treadmill video from March 20th?
I have not.
So, on April 2nd of 2021, did you receive any phone call or text message from your son, Christopher?
Yes.
And at what time was that?
I think I texted him first in the morning to see if Corey had come home. And he told me he had. I'm paraphrasing,
But did he tell you in a text message?
that was in a text message, yes.
Go ahead.
So we texted back and forth about, I asked him what time, how is he, because he had been kept up late the night before. And I, had been on the phone the night before with Chris and I knew he had been in the hospital and I wanted to know how he was. And Chris said when he got home, he was very tired. And I said to him, just let him go to sleep. I just assumed he was up till 1:30 in the morning. He's a little boy. He's probably dead tired. Just let him lay down and sleep and rest. So we went back and forth a little bit about that. And then about noontime, we texted more.
Who texted who?
I want to say I texted Chris just to see how Corey was. And then we had some real estate business to discuss. We did that. And then I heard from him later on in the afternoon that he was taking Corey to the hospital.
What time was that?
I want to say 3-ish, something in that
Was
area.
a phone call or a text?
I believe that was a phone call.
Okay. Did he tell you why?
He didn't really know why. He
No,
said,
Did he tell you, if you remember, did he tell you why he was taking Corey to the hospital?
because he was lethargic, something's wrong with him. Something's wrong, has to take him, Took him to the hospital. My husband was at the dentist at the time. I called him to let him know something was going on. Get another phone call from Chris that, something's really wrong with him.
What time was that?
I don't know.
You were still home in
I was
Monroe?
home.
Okay.
I was home
In Monroe.
in Monroe. And the next phone call I receive, Chris is hysterical. What did she do to him? He's screaming on the phone. And I'm like, what's going on? And he tells me Corey passed. So I call my husband. I'm flipping out at the house. And my son Danny's home, my youngest. And I'm screaming. He comes, runs upstairs. What's going on? Thank God my husband came home very quickly after that. We got in the car and went down there. So we're calling Chris. I was so worried because he just was so adamant that something happened when he was with his mother. Something happened to him. So I said, Chris, don't go there. Don't go to their house. Don't. Just please wait for us. So we left. As we're driving, my son calls me.
Which son?
Daniel, my youngest, he was home by himself. I don't know how long after this was. He calls me. He's getting phone calls at the house, on our house phone. Threats. People are, your brother's a murderer. This was like, it was ridiculous how quickly.
So when you talk about how quickly, I'm trying to develop a time frame.
Yeah,
Were you and Mr. Gregor in the vehicle that you were driving to Southern Ocean Methodist when you see that call?
yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
It's like the whole thing was we were devastated. We're crying in the car. We're calling the police in the car because no one was there. There was no police, nobody. So we're calling the police. We're trying to find out what's going on. At some point, we get to the hospital.
Was
And
Christopher there?
no.
Okay.
No. And Danny calls us again. Rebecca was at the house. And she was making threats. I just said, go in the house. Just lock the doors, go in the house. Just stay in the house.
Now, did you have any communication with Chris during this time period?
Yes,
Was it by phone or by text?
both.
Okay. When was the first communication you had with Chris? After the phone call you've already described for us.
I don't know times.
Okay.
I mean-
Well, let's use different things that happened that day. There came a time you went to the police station?
Yes,
Which police station?
I believe it was Barnegat.
Okay. Do you recall what time you got to Barnegat?
Objection. She doesn't remember any of the time, Judge.
Well,
I wasn't looking at the
first one,
clock.
Jack Willis, recall the time you got there, she said she doesn't recall.
I wasn't looking at a clock. I was hysterical that my grandson had just passed. I wasn't timing things.
This is after the hospital?
Yes. This is after you arrived at the hospital?
Excuse me?
This is after you responded to the hospital?
We went to the hospital. We were there for a bit. The police came. And then they asked us if we would go to the police station to give a, statement or whatever. And we agreed and we went.
Okay. Phone call with Danny, did it happen prior to that or after that?
Oh, it was prior to that.
Was it prior to getting to the hospital?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Not the Rebecca one, the getting a phone call at the house.
The Rebecca one.
I believe that happened at the hospital.
When we were at the hospital before you went to Bart.
Yes,
Do you remember speaking to Chris after you received that phone call?
I didn't speak to him. It was texting.
Would you text him?
I let him know what was going on.
Did you respond?
I don't think so.
Did you have any communication with him after that, Chris?
That night,
When's the next time you had communication?
I think the next time I had been texting him to let him know things that were going on, because that night, people, friends of ours, were contacting us to tell us there were posts on Facebook saying terrible things about Chris, saying he was wanted, giving our address out,
By
saying,
the way, when you were at the Barnes Police Department, did anybody tell you that they were looking for your son?
no.
Did you give an interview to Detective Mitchell?
I gave it to a detective. I don't know. I don't recall his
Is he a
name.
tall, handsome fellow?
I don't recall.
The detective you gave the statement to, did he tell you at that moment that your son was wanted and he was a fugitive?
Oh, no, no.
So when you were communicating with your son, were you communicating with him the things that were happening to you, your family, and
On Facebook, yeah.
when's the next time you spoke to either Christopher or texted to him that he responded?
I believe it was the next day,
April 3rd.
April 3rd.
About what time was that?
It was probably in the afternoon.
And did you know where he was?
No,
Did there come a time where after that communication that you knew he was coming back?
yes.
Okay, when was that?
I believe it was that night,
April 3rd.
April 3rd.
And did you help make the arrangements to get him back?
No.
Did he come back?
Oh, yeah.
And when was that?
That was on the 4th. He was back home to the house,
But he started making the arrangements to come back, to your knowledge, on April 3rd.
April 3rd.
Do you know where he was when you now started communicating?
I didn't know anything until he was stopped. And then we found out where he was. I had no idea where he was.
Where was he stopped?
In Tennessee.
By the way, when he was stopped, was he taken into custody?
No,
Did anybody at that time tell you that he was wanted for murder?
no,
Did anybody at that time tell you he was a fugitive?
no.
Did they let him go?
Yes,
Was he in your home the next day?
yes.
Did you ever speak with Christopher about taking care of his dog?
Yes.
And when was that?
We didn't speak. It was a text.
And when was that?
That was the night that Chris passed.
So on the 2nd.
Yes.
Do you recall about what time that was?
No.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Strong.
Thank you. Hi, Mrs. Gregor.
Hi.
Were you waiting in the hallway before you came in to testify?
Yes.
Were you waiting with your husband?
Excuse me?
Were you waiting with your husband, Mr. Gregor?
Prior to, yeah.
Did he get a chance to tell you about his testimony before you came in today?
He just told me he broke down a little bit. I just wanted to know how he was, how he felt.
Now, you said that you saw Corey on March 22nd, 2021, right?
Mhm.
That was a Monday?
Mhm.
So it would have been after school?
Mhm.
Maybe you have to say yes or no, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
And when you saw Corey, you were looking at houses, right?
Yes.
You went to visit your brother,
Yes,
you had dinner,
yes.
and you saw bruises on
I only saw one
her, on his face.
on his forehead.
And he told you where he got it,
Yes,
and he told you that he fell off the treadmill,
he told me he fell on the treadmill.
on the treadmill.
Mhm.
Now, you gave a statement to Detective Mitchell at the Barnegat Police Department
Mhm.
the night that Corey passed, correct?
Mhm.
That would have been April.
Oh, I'm sorry,
2nd,
yes,
April 2nd, 2021.
yes.
That was between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m., right?
I don't remember the time.
It was after you left Southern Ocean Medical Center,
Okay.
right? I'm
Yes.
asking you.
Yes,
Was it dark outside?
it was dark, yes.
And that statement was about 36 minutes long, right?
I have no idea.
If I tell you it was 36 minutes long, would you believe me?
If that's what you said it is, I'll believe you. Yes,
And you gave that statement with your husband, right?
yes,
And you provided the police with whatever information you could, right?
yes.
And you wanted to assist in trying to figure out where the defendant was, right?
I don't know at that time if that was foremost on my mind.
And you didn't know what happened to Corey, right?
True.
Did you ever tell the police that the last time you saw Corey, he had a bruise on his head?
I don't recall.
Did you ever tell the police that the last time you saw Corey, he told you that he fell off a treadmill?
Honestly, I don't recall.
If I showed you your statement that you gave the detective, would it help you recall if you told them?
It would, yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as S-160. Your statement to Detective Mitchell on March 2nd, 2021.
Okay,
Your husband.
I mean, April.
I'm sorry, April 2nd.
okay.
Could you tell me if that helps refresh your recollection as to whether you told the detectives that Corey fell off a treadmill or had a bruise on his head?
I don't see it.
Do you not see it because it's not there?
I guess so.
Now, wouldn't it be important for the detectives looking into Corey's death to know that just days prior, he told you
Mhm.
that he fell from a treadmill?
No, because when we saw him on the 22nd, he was fine. He was running around. He was not traumatized by falling off the treadmill or falling on the treadmill.
In your opinion, right?
My opinion, my
Yes or no, ma'am?
husband's,
Yes or no? Your opinion.
in my opinion, yes.
Okay. Now, as you sit here today, you have never seen the video of the treadmill, right?
Yes,
So your testimony is that you didn't tell the police that Corey fell from a treadmill because, in your opinion, that wasn't important at the time, yes or no?
yes,
And between March 22nd, 2021, and actually ever again after that, you never saw Corey in person again.
yes.
Now, bringing your attention to April 2nd of 2021, or April 1st of 2021, you were not down in Barnegat with the defendant, were you?
No,
You were not with Corey, were you?
no,
And anything that you know about April 1st of 2021, you only know what the defendant told you,
as far as what?
as far as where Corey was and what was happening that evening. You
Yes.
only know what he told you, right?
Yes, yeah.
And as far as April 2nd of 2021, you were not in Barnegat, right?
No,
You did not go there and see Corey, right?
no,
You only know what was going on in the defendant's apartment that day based upon what he told you, right?
yes,
Now, during the statement that you gave to the police, you told them that you spoke to the defendant at 11 a.m., right?
I don't recall the time.
If I showed you your statement, would it help refresh your recollection about
I
the
might have
time?
said that, but I don't know if that was the exact time.
You spoke to the police
Mhm.
that day, April 2nd, right?
Yes,
And you told them 11 a.m.
I guess I did, yes.
Okay. And as you sit here today, years later, you've remembered throughout the course of the time that you didn't remember. Is that so?
You're asking me if what I told him I remembered that day, and now 3 years later, that's a big difference in time. I don't remember the exact time. It might have been 11, it might have been 11:30. I'm not
Is it
sure.
fair to say that you texted with your son after 11 a.m. on April
Yes.
2nd, 2021?
Yes,
And that's the first time during those text messages that he told you that he observed anything different about Corey, correct?
no, he told me in the morning when he got in that he was sleepy.
And you said that was via text?
That was texts, yes.
Okay, so in the morning was text?
hmm
At 11 a.m. was text?
Yes,
Noon was text?
all texts,
Okay.
yes.
And then what about 3 o'clock?
That's
Text or
when
phone
Chris
call?
called me.
That's when he called you?
Yes,
Are you sure that you didn't call him at 3
I
o'clock?
might have called him, yeah.
You said that you spoke to the defendant while he was at the hospital, right?
That's when he called me, yeah.
And that was all phone calls, correct?
Mhm.
Until the last, what was the text message?
The last phone call, I believe, was when he had left the hospital.
Okay. And the last communication that you had from him while he was still in New Jersey was the text message that you described, right?
So he called me when
I'm just asking about the text
I'm
message.
trying
the
to
last
get it
communication
ready
from
in
him.
trying to go through some.
Once it's ready, just tell me yes or no.
Okay, so he called me. We drove down there and
Could
then
you
we
ask
were
the witness to
texting.
answer my question? If she has to process it, that's okay in her mind.
No, I'm not sure what the question is at this point. Is it the last communication was
Yeah.
text? Is that the question?
The
Is
last
That
communication from the defendant
was text,
while he was in New Jersey was
was
text.
text,
Okay,
yes,
thank you. And that's the one that you testified about earlier with the dog,
with
right?
the dog.
Okay. Now, could you tell me what the last 4 digits of Danny's phone number are?
I don't know off the top of my head.
You don't know Danny's phone number.
It's saved on my phone as my son's name.
And you said that as you were driving down to the hospital, that's when Danny called you, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And that he was telling you secondhand about threats that he saw or heard.
Yes,
Okay. You actually didn't get any of those threats, right?
not that night, no,
Right. And you weren't home.
no,
Okay. So none of those things were firsthand to you.
No.
And you got to the hospital and the defendant was no longer there.
correct.
And then Danny didn't call you again until later on at night to talk to you about Rebecca.
Maybe, yes, okay, yes,
Okay. And you weren't there for that either.
I was not,
So this is all coming from Danny.
right.
And are you aware that the defendant wouldn't let the hospital call Brianna Michelot about Corey while he was there?
I have no,
Are you aware that Brianna didn't even know that Corey had passed until 6 o'clock?
no,
And when you spoke to the police about everything that was going on during that statement, you didn't tell them about all that information from Danny,
No.
did you? Okay.
no,
In fact, you and your husband were talking about the fact that Danny and your daughter Kimberly were fine, right?
we're fine. I don't know what you mean by that.
Do you remember you and your husband saying, but Danny and Kim are home, they're fine?
I guess, yeah, they're home and they're okay, yes.
They were fine, right?
Yeah, they were fine.
And so you said that you had sent your son, the defendant, a number of communications about what was going on, but he didn't respond to you, correct?
Yes,
And he didn't respond to you until April 3rd,
the
correct?
next day, yeah,
And you said he was home on the 4th?
yes.
Are you aware that in the morning of the 4th, he was still in Tennessee,
He might have been, yes.
and he picked someone up at the airport towards noon on the 4th,
I guess that's the time, yes.
and you're aware that it's at least an 11-hour drive home from there?
They flew home.
Nothing else, Judge.
Ms. Schroen just said that your son was in Tennessee at the time.
Mhm.
I mean, it's-
I'm sorry, yes.
And were you part of making any of the arrangements
No.
for him to come back?
No.
Come back?
He did.
Was it the next day?
It was the 4th. He was home the 4th,
And he was in your home?
in my home.
And did you physically look at him and see him?
I did.
Touch him?
Yes,
So it was him?
it was him.
Nothing further, Joe.
So, ma'am, I have a couple things to ask you to clarify. Danny's calling you while you and your husband are on the way to Southern Ocean County, all right?
Yes,
And then Danny later calls you again that same night to tell you that Rebecca Mitchell showed up at the house.
yes,
And you're saying that she's making threats.
yes.
Except what you're really saying is she's saying Chris was going to be charged with murder.
And she was saying things along the line, and I'm paraphrasing, that you people are going to watch it, and just crazy stuff, saying crazy stuff like that.
And was there a threat to burn down your house
No,
or to assault you,
no,
assault your husband?
not directly, no.
And the wanted posters are that he's wanted for murder.
Yes,
Before you, on direct examination, Mr. Glucci's asking you questions, and he asked you about that by April 4th, Christopher's coming home, except he gets stopped in Tennessee, right?
yes,
And you only know that because you heard that later on, right? You weren't there in
No,
Tennessee, right?
no.
And then you told him that by the next day, he was home in your house, right?
he was home on the 4th,
Right. How do you remember that?
because it was Easter.
So he stopped in Tennessee after noontime. His car is seized, his cell phone is seized,
Mhm.
and you're telling us that he's back home in New Jersey for Easter on Sunday, the same day he stopped.
Yeah, if that was the day, yes.
Or wasn't it more likely April 5th that he gets back to New Jersey?
I-
You know that in your personal knowledge, he came back on April 4th, if he stopped after 12 noon in Tennessee?
I think it was the 4th. I haven't done any research on my phone or anything to verify it, but I thought it was Easter Sunday. Him and his friend were in the house.
Council, any further questions? A lot of my questions.
Yes. You said him and his friend,
Yes,
was that Laura Powell?
yes,
Did you speak with Laura Powell prior to her going to Tennessee?
no,
Do you know why Laura Powell was going to Tennessee?
to be with Chris on the drive home.
Anything from Steve?
No, thank you.
Did you or your husband make arrangements for Laura Powell to fly to Tennessee?
No,
So is it fair to say that you and your husband are relaying to Christopher that there's allegations against him about murder, and that Laura Powell is also telling him there's allegations about murder, and all of you are telling him to come back to New Jersey?
I don't know what communication he had with Laura, but we were telling him this, these allegations are out there. And as far as we knew, they were false. No one said anything to us that he was wanted. And we
Let
were,
me ask you, man, does it matter if they're false or they're true at that point? You don't really know, right? If they're
we
false or true.
don't, we don't.
So does it matter if they're false or true? It just mattered that he
I
should
wanted
come
him
back
home.
instead of
Oh,
plead,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely. I said, we wanted him home. We needed to find out what happened and we needed him to come home.
And you agreed it was better for him to be back in New Jersey while all this was going on
Absolutely,
than to be halfway across the country.
absolutely.
Objection to halfway across the country.
To be in Tennessee or Arkansas, wherever, however far that is. It's not, certainly not contiguous to New Jersey, right? It's not like
Right.
he went to Philadelphia.
Right,
All right.
exactly.
Thanks. Any further questions?
Yes, Judge, can I ask some questions as a result of your honors?
Go ahead.
When you gave the statement to the police, isn't it true that they were asking you for Chris's phone number?
They might have, yes,
And they were asking if you had been in touch with him, correct?
they might have.
And they were asking if you could try to get in touch with him in front of them?
I guess.
Wouldn't it be fair to say that they wanted to get in touch with the defendant too?
I'm sure they did, yes. Yes.
And are you aware that the reason the defendant was stopped in Tennessee was because there was an alert on his car
I found that out later.
and the police kept his car
Yes,
and they kept his phone?
and they kept his phone.
Not for no reason, right?
No, I totally understand that, yes.
Due to the death of Corey?
Of course, yes.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Did they arrest him in Tennessee?
No, they did not.
Did he come home to your home?
Yes, he did.
When you told him to come home, did he come home?
He did.
Thank you.
All right, ma'am, thank you for coming in. Yes, Mr. All right, so Mr. Bellucci, you will be the proponent of the testimony of either or both of these witnesses. What do you intend to elicit in front of the jury, and why would it be admissible?
So I'm trying to elicit from Mr. Gregor, David Gregor, just foundation questions, and I'm certainly not going to go into, most of what I did this morning on the foundation was just so you all got an idea of the background. So I'm certainly not going to get into grandpa becoming a father, just basically how this began, when Corey came into their life, when Christopher moved out of the house. I believe that's all important to show how foundation background to the jury on how this occurred. Then he moved out. Then he was in communication with.
But it can't be infected with commentary that I was worried Christopher was going to be unprotected in Barnegat and those things. It can be that, I remember Christopher moved out of my house, assuming the state doesn't object, and I have to rule on that objection, but it can be, I remember Christopher moved out of my house in August of whatever it was, 2020 or something like that. Not that he gives an opinion that he disagreed with it, or wasn't a good idea, or all those things.
Obviously, I believe that none of that is relevant. So,
All right, thank you.
I would not elicit any of that.
But I would ask you to instruct him to not to add that. In other words, I don't think you actually asked him if it was a good idea. I think he just added it on his own. So he's obviously an experienced witness. He's retired from the state police. So I don't want him adding things to the, your question calls for a factual response. He gives the factual response with additional commentary or opinion. So I would ask that you tell him to answer the question that's asked and not add these things, because he did that frequently.
Judge, as always, I will be guided by the court, and anything the court asks me to do, I will relay to the witness. I also think it's relevant from the time period from March 20th until April 2nd, especially on March 22nd, that they actually have contact out after the Treadmill. And the demeanor, the son's demeanor, they describe the events of the day. April, who runs down to such he came back. He didn't keep going. They weren't making arrangements for him to flee further.
I mean, but frankly, I'm not so sure how that helps you. That people are accusing him of murder and are telling him to stop fleeing in the return. So what you're there is arguably giving the state is that from back fleeing until his family talks and sends it to him. So I want to make sure what I'm exactly trying to establish for you. Because if anything, it gives me, this testimony gave me more confidence that I made the correct decision with the flight charge, because even the defendant's family was advising him that an accusation was being made against him. It doesn't have to be an accusation by the police.
That doesn't. But I think an accusation from the police and none happened would be more affirmative for them to make that request than an accusation made by Rebecca Nichola or the rest of them people. So,
I mean, but that's not as persuasive to me, because obviously you have a grandparent knows the child's died in the hospital after having come to the hospital brought by one parent. So someone's saying, how does a healthy 6-year-old die? Oh my God, that's murder.
you're a good parent. It's a threat to me. They said they didn't see the video. They said that they lived with them for a year. David Gregor testified that he lived with him for a year, never saw him mistreat him or harm that child. That through that whole
Well, you intend to
time,
elicit that?
no.
All right.
Obviously, you're not gonna let me.
Right. That was my next question.
Right, obviously, that's not happening. So now they have no reason to believe.
All right, so you need to tell me though what specifically you're going to try and elicit between these conversations. You can't have the defendant testify through his mother or father. So how do you get in?
Are you telling me that I need to then have to call the defendant?
No, you never need to have to call the defendant.
Oh.
You can't just have the defendant testify. Certain things are present sense impressions. So if he says, I'm at the hospital, that probably comes in. I talked to my son, said he was at the hospital. And everybody knows that anyway, so it's harmless. Even if it's not totally appropriate. We had a video of him going to the hospital. We all went to the hospital. So those things are fine. I think perhaps the mom saying he was distraught on the phone. The self-serving declaration about what did she do to him,
I don't think that.
that doesn't come in.
Obviously.
All right, so that's,
I'm distraught on the phone, I believe comes in.
right, she knows her son, she's talked to him all the time, she recognizes his voice, and she says, how was he on the phone? He was upset, he was distraught. That's a present sense impression, I think that's legit. And it's also, there's the videos that you cross-examine the nurse on, shows he's distraught. But I'm just trying to figure out about all the hearsay things. She can't testify. Danny says it's a threat. I mean, why can't Danny testify? Why don't you call Danny and say what happened?
I've been to that now after this hearing.
Because
Danny's not on anybody's witness list, is fine.
I don't know, I pressed the button.
because the characters, let's say I agree with you that, yes, someone accuses your child of murder and say, hey, that's a threat.
To me, it is.
Okay, then we got to find out what was exactly said. So to the extent you're relying upon that information, whoever came to the house or called the house said something to Danny, and however that can be conveyed to the defendant, we got to figure out what was said, not the witness's opinion testimony about what she believes Danny conveyed to her.
Okay.
And does the state know about the defendant being released from Tennessee and when he got back to New Jersey?
Yes, Judge, our understanding of it is that it was not on April 4th is when,
He's taking his phone, gets taken,
Right.
he doesn't get arrested.
correct.
But I mean, does he, I don't know if that's at 12 noon or that's at 8 o'clock at night. Because if it's 8 o'clock at night, he's not back here on April 4th.
Judge, the defendant gets stopped shortly after, well, he picks up Laura Powell outside of the airport shortly after 11 a.m. I think their last text is like 11:17 a.m. that he's there. He then gets detained by the Alcoa Police Department, where at first they're not free to leave. They're told they're not free to leave. They take the car, they take the phone. And then the defendant and Laura go to a nearby hotel, I guess, to figure out what they're going to do. I was under the impression they rented a car from Enterprise. As
Well,
far
the
as,
father testified that I think he helped them arrange rent a car or something like that.
right, so they're held hours by the Alcoa Police Department. They have no phone, they have no car, they rent a car. What they do with the car, I don't know. If they got home on the 4th, Judge, it was really, really late, because I don't know how all of that would have been possible.
Well, if there's testimony that they, by the mother, if that testimony is elicited, if the mom says he got home on Easter, then the state's allowed to call a rebuttal witness to say that he was still in Tennessee, renting a room at the afternoon of the 4th, so. Because it's relevant on the flight charge when he gets back to Jersey, obviously.
Sure.
But I took her testimony on direct, is that he was gonna come back on the 4th, he got stopped. We asked her what happened, was he charged, was he arrested, what happened? And she said, and he came back the next day. And she was talking about the 4th, so the next day to me meant the 5th. And then she says later on cross, oh, he was home on Easter on the 4th.
Judge, I was under the impression, and this is an impression, but I thought that when the police went down there, that he was still in the area on April 6th. I could be wrong, and I didn't elicit that
Well,
testimony.
you can find out from your witnesses.
I can, but that's the impression I was under.
Judge, there's actually testimony taken from, I forget the witness, it was the crime scene investigator that went down to Tennessee, that when he got there, Mr. Gregor was gone already. He didn't say where he went, but he was no longer there.
He wasn't in the
That
impound
was O'Hearn.
yard. That's
That was
what
O'Hearn.
Sergeant O'Hearn said. Sergeant O'Hearn responded to the impound yard
But we
where
know-
the defendant's car was taken, and all he said was that he didn't have interactions with the defendant. He wasn't at the impound yard.
You know what? I can recall on my case, there's a sergeant Coles, who does the GPS of the car that shows that he was going to Arkansas.
Well, that's only gonna show when the car sees though. His car stays there. His car and his phone will get taken by police. That was when he came back.
But if we're arguing that he's leaving, and I'm arguing that he's coming back, and the GPS tracking that Sergeant Coles does indicates that he's south and now heading north towards Jersey, is certainly relevant.
So my notes indicate that Detective Sergeant Michael Hearn testified that he responded to Alcoa, Tennessee on April 6th. So
That doesn't matter.
so that obviously he has no knowledge and he doesn't see, searches the defendant's vehicle, but he doesn't see the defendant, which obviously is after everybody's saying he's coming home.
Judge, with respect to the flight issue, though, he leaves the hospital.
No, I get that.
Before the
I get the
mutual-
flight charge, right? I'm not ungiving it.
Oh, I'm
But
talking about the
to-
defense explanation of it.
Right, but the point is he's coming back, then the testimony needs to be truthful and accurate as to when he came back.
Right.
So,
And-
I mean, I can't stop someone from testifying. They think it was April 5th.
Right.
But then the state's on notice that, or I'm sorry, I think it was April, state's on notice that you can go rebuttal witness to say, no, he was still in Tennessee then.
Right, and it's important too that the defendant's not coming back, and nobody could testify that he's coming back until anybody talks to him on the 3rd. So from when he leaves the hospital on the 2nd and stops speaking to everybody and goes into airplane mode, and until the 3rd, when he takes his phone out of airplane mode, he doesn't hear what's going on as far as these quote unquote threats.
Well, that's what I said
And
to Mr.
he's-
Lucci before.
That's flight.
What exactly do I allow here? Because it's only relevant if the defendant knows it and he's somehow reacting upon it. Right?
And Judge, all the information from the witnesses about these perceived threats or thoughts of maybe charging, I mean, that's an accusation or fearing an accusation.
Right.
That's the very,
Right.
the very.
That's what I said, right?
But who's to say to a person which is a threat and which is not a threat? To Gregor's, that, I mean, nobody in the world knows what really happened here, but we know the background here, right? So as we sit here right now, knowing what the background is, and knowing now that Rebecca and Mitchell's at their home with all the stuff that had happened prior to that, you know that David Gregor and Carolyn Gregor have a different state of mind than you and I standing here right now and saying a family member is accused of a crime. It was much different to them, right? And Dave Gregor testified that he had a conversation with his son about these things that Rebecca said. I think he said it was at 5:22.
Judge, they didn't think it was threatening enough to even tell the police. They told the police they
Well,
hadn't heard
that's
from
impeach-
Rebecca.
That's impeachment, you can cross them on that, obviously.
May I put something on the record?
Uh, When did, hang on one second, make a note to yourself when I'm on record.
Thank you.
I'm gonna finish my thought here. When does Mr. Gregor testify about that? He says that he's listening to his wife, he hears she's picking up the phone, he hears her with these conversations, presumably this is a call coming in from Danny, that she's speaking to him, she's speaking to the defendant's hysterical at the hospital, the dad then Stafford PD, and they get to the hospital and his son's gone. He then hears again from Danny about what's happening at the house. Where does he say he calls Christopher that night and tells him anything about what's happening at the house? He just said generally conveyed to him that we didn't want him to leave. We told him to come home.
Judge, I believe the testimony was that he called Christopher either before or immediately after he spoke to staff at PD. I was doing it direct, so I don't really remember when it was. But I could have sworn he testified that he called Christopher either prior to calling Stafford or
All right, what else are you trying to elicit?
Judge, I think that would be it.
And he, in terms of what DCP&P is telling him, right, that's all out.
I think that was a decision we made early on in this case.
Well, I mean, the father's testifying about what DCP&P is supposed to be telling him about orders and those kind of things.
I think you elicited that testimony, and I'll be guided by you when we go to trial. I'll caution Mr. Gregor, like you just asked me to caution him about certain things. I will caution him about that also.
Yeah, I don't think I listed that part. What I was saying was that, for instance, on cross-examination, they start to ask him about his knowledge of court orders, and he starts answering what he's being told by DCP&P. That's not knowledge of court orders.
But, well, I obviously know that.
All right, what's the state's position on all this?
Your Honor, in regard to the threats, I mean, the state's position is that it's all hearsay at this point. And not only is it hearsay, the witness does not have a basis of knowledge regarding the threat whatsoever. So that's step one. And then step two, it turns from a lack of basis of knowledge then to hearsay. And then somehow the opinion comes in, and this opinion now is conveyed somehow to the defendant, which we have no real testimony about either. So that's their subjective opinion about a threat they didn't hear should not be properly admitted through that witness.
What makes it even more complicated, though, is
Yep.
let's say the parents legitimately perceive that whatever's happening in Monroe is a threat. Whatever Danny's telling them, maybe Danny embellishes. Parents think it's a threat.
Right.
They're not saying to the son, hey, listen, drive out of state, get a hotel room, and stay there until things calm down. They're saying, come back.
Right.
So it's inconsistent with being threatened. You're saying, if you say, listen, where are you? You're in Tennessee. Okay, listen, get a hotel room, stay there. We'll tell the police where you are. We won't tell anyone else where you are. You know, so how does this help with the flight?
It does. And you're making assumptions that this is the way that you would handle that if that's what's going on in your life. That's not the way he was handling it. in the totality of what's going on here.
No, I'm saying that you proffered an explanation for flight, that he was threatened. I'm saying the testimony today is, if you believe the parents, that there's threats, but instead of telling him to protect himself from the threats, they're telling him to come back with threats. So I don't know that, I'm trying to find this connection or nexus between the proper testimony and the explanation of the flight charge.
I don't think it's what the parents are thinking, it's what he's thinking. So if they're conveying to him, you're getting threats, and his thought process is, I better stay away before they kill me, I can understand it. And then the parents finally get through to him in a day to come back. And he comes back. The GPS shows him in Arkansas going back to Jersey.
That never got presented to the
I'll
jury for
put
some reason.
calls on if you want.
That never, I wondered why we did that in the 104 hearing. We had Detective Coles used a lot of visual aids in his 104 hearing and not at trial.
Depending on your ruling here, I'll recall calls.
I mean, does the state agree with that? He's turned around and come back, or no?
Yes.
Detective Coles testified he was in Southwest Arkansas or something like that. I don't know where that is in relation to this airport in Tennessee.
Counsel provided me with some reciprocal discovery last night. That's a call detail log. It's the defendant's phone bill, which appears much neater than the CDW that I have, that I would need more of like a David Stern to interpret. And the call details, the origin of the calls on 4-3 that the defendant's making are all in Arkansas. So that would lead me to believe that, this location in Tennessee, it's east of Arkansas. I don't know if that means he's coming back. I know that Laura Powell flies down there to meet him. I know that he's, doing whatever he's doing when he's down there, but
So
I
is he
don't.
coming back, or is he going to Tennessee to pick up Laura Bell?
I don't know if he's coming back. I know what he's saying to people while he's there, but Judge, it's even inconsistent with the Carolyn's Gregor's testimony. I think about a text message where he's saying stuff about doing things to other people. Are you afraid or are you not? Are you going to attack others or are you not? What story is it? It's all
Who are you referring to?
Carolyn Gregor, when she was talking about a text from him, and he was saying, what did she do to him? And she's telling him, don't do anything to them, or whatever the testimony was. I'll rely on the record. But that's not a conversation about fearing retribution from the Mitchells or anybody they know.
The defense
That's the
counsel says he's not
opposite.
going to listen to anything.
I'll go listen to both. Forget about not listening.
Judge, I
Right.
understand that, but when we're trying to figure out, if the defense counsel was talking about his client's state of mind, and we don't know what that was from the parents. We have no idea what that was, and I don't think that their testimony lends anything to that. We don't know what his state of mind was, other than the information that's been brought before the court that's not hearsay, which is in his phone.
He was not kept in Tennessee. If he truly was leaving, now knowing everything going on, they took his car, they took his phone, he rented a car and drove back to New Jersey. He didn't get in a rent-a-car and head to California and on the first flight to Montenegro.
Right, I
He
understand.
came home.
Well, I mean, that's factually
And I'm not
true,
yelling
and
at you.
I don't have a problem with you eliciting that. I would like it to be correct in terms of when he got back, but I don't have a problem with you eliciting that. And I think the detectives testified. I thought Detective Sergeant Scuddy and Detective Sergeant Ahern testified that he wasn't arrested in Tennessee. The car was seized and the phone was seized, and they searched the car, but he wasn't charged. Mr. Gregor wasn't charged there.
And Judge, if ever there was a time when he knew the new, whatever you call the thing around your neck, is getting tight, it would be when there's a police department stopping you on an open road, seizing your car, searching your car, detaining you, and letting you go. If he was going to run, that was the time.
All right, so with respect to some general background about the general chronology, Corey coming into Mr. Gregor's life, Corey coming into his grandparents' life, where Corey resided, where the defendant resided, when the defendant moved to Barnegat, those things are all general background information that's legitimate, and the parents know that on their personal knowledge. In terms of the fact that the parents saw Corey on March 22nd, 2021, they know that on their personal knowledge. It's an irrelevant time period between the dates set forth in count 1 and count 2 of the indictment. And in fact, the child had a bruise on his forehead. So obviously they testified to that, that they saw him and he was excited and happy. If Mr. Gallucci doesn't elicit the bruise, then the state will no doubt elicit the bruise. And apparently there was no effort to check him further, even though he has got a bruise on his forehead. He's off the treadmill. No one says, well, how's the rest of you? Or presumably the kid's got clothes on, so I don't know where that's going. Now that opens up issues as well. The hardest issue is what the parents are being told by others on April 2nd and what they're telling Mr. Gregor. So to some extent, what the parents are telling Mr. Gregor, whether or not it's accurate, can be in the defendant's mind in terms of his reason for fleeing. My difficulty with it is allowing the parents to categorize it as threats. Having the mother or the father say that they texted the defendant saying that Rebecca Mitchell came to the house. Even though that's hearsay, it's not for the truth of the matter, it's for the effect it would have on the defendant in terms of him fleeing. But allowing them to characterize that as threats, if there's somebody that has a specific quote, Rebecca Mitchell said, that's a different story. But it's like the example I gave you before. I'm being threatened by this person. Why? Well, because I owe money and they're going to sue me. That's not a threat. That's someone, a self-serving thing. Well, I'm not paying the money back, and I'm now trying to blame the person who loaned me the money because they're threatening to sue me. So, threatening to go to the police to accuse him and see if the police would charge him it's not an unlawful threat. And the danger of that testimony is a reasonable reaction to that might be to return home too. So you run that risk by eliciting that testimony that he came home. I know you say that at some point he came home after he was stopped, after his car was taken and all those things. So I get it, but you can listen if you want, but it seems to me like it's a double-edged sword. So I'm only speaking this freely because we have a jury here. Obviously, I didn't add one question in front of the jury, and I don't in the trial, but at this hearing I did.
But I understand.
So I would like to see how you're going to couch it, but I would permit some testimony that the parents messaged or advised the defendant that Rebecca Mitchell would come to the house and there was allegations about whether it was a murder. And state can give me a limiting instruction that defense can then review that you can't consider that for the truth of the matter, but you can consider it for what effect, if any, it had on the defendant's decision to, what effect, if any, it has on your consideration of the flight charge I previously gave you.
Judge, can I ask a clarification? I
Sure.
thought that the testimony was that Rebecca Mitchell came to the house later, like after the defendant would have stopped responding. I thought that the thing with Danny happened first, and Rebecca was much later.
Correct. Yeah, the thing from Danny initially is very ambiguous. Danny calls and says he's getting threats on the house line. And Dad doesn't say house line. The mom says house line. Dad just says Danny calls and he's at the house and he's getting threats. And then at some point later, I guess the parents are at the Barnegat Police Department. Danny calls and says Rebecca's at the house making threats.
Yeah,
The threats are to charge him with murder, and then the father testified he did text the defendant to, quote, let him know what's going on.
And then we had testimony that the defendant's phone's in airplane mode and can't receive those texts at that point.
You can respond. I mean, that's your response, though.
Okay.
And that's your response so it doesn't matter, ladies and gentlemen, because he wasn't receiving messages because his phone was. But I think I'm obligated to allow some testimony that the parents were conveying to him, whether it's correct or incorrect, that Rebecca Mitchell came to the house and that what people were saying. People were threatening he was going to be charged with murder. I think that's the most accurate way to say it. They were threatening he was going to be charged with murder. Not threatening to burn the house down, but threatening to be charged with murder.
You want me to say I agree with you?
Well, you can respond to how you want to deal with that, sure.
I think it's something more than that. It's not, I'm burning down the house, obviously, but, and I certainly don't mean this in regard to you, but the fact that a parent who's going through all this stuff is getting that phone call is a lot more troubling than, you left your baseball glove at the park.
Yeah, but the problem is, though, in theory, this is fine, except most of it's not admissible. If you had a witness that says, I got a call or a visit from somebody that made these specific threats, I called Christopher Gregor and relayed to him these specific threats, that would be a little different. What you have is Danny relaying to mom, relaying to dad, who's trying to text son, who may or may not be getting it, and we're all not sure really what was said. So I'm trying to accept that something might have funneled down maybe to the defendant.
I understand what you're trying to do.
But, and I think that's about as much as I can do to make it admissible, but you don't have, if Mr. Gregor's at his house and he says, Rebecca Mitchell showed up with a can of gas and was gonna burn down the house, Christopher, don't come back home right now, find a safe place to be, that would be different.
But, I can't, I'm just a poor country lawyer, as I said, I don't even think I could put Danny in here, because even if Danny comes here and says, Rebecca Mitchell came to the house and said, like you just said,
Right.
I'm gonna burn this house down because your brother's a murderer, that, Danny's never conveyed that to him. Danny's conveying to mom, what's going on here, they're at the house, they're calling him a murderer, yada, 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 and then
What I can't do is I can't let it get embellished from Danny to mom to dad to whatever got to Christopher. There's got to be some trustworthy basis in the rules of evidence to say that somehow gets conveyed to Mr. Gregor, the defendant, Christopher Gregor. And that's what I'm trying to do, because I think it is relevant to his state of mind when he's allegedly fleeing, because I gave the flight charge and the state's going to say that's conscious of guilt. And you said he's been threatened, so I'm going to allow somehow for you to get in that there was information conveyed to him by his parents that people were coming to the house and saying he was going to be charged with murder. But I don't think you can allow it to be because you partially created this problem by talking about the house being bombarded and all this other stuff, but it turns out that wasn't until August. None of that's relevant. The rocks and the fish being thrown at the house in August are not relevant to whether or not he was going to Tennessee or Arkansas on April 2nd, 3rd. So you brought that up in direct, and that was like the threats to the house and those kind of things. And that would, listen, if people were coming to my house, throwing things at my house every day, I might go move somewhere else, or might go temporarily live somewhere else.
they did.
But they probably did. I don't doubt that. But that's not relevant to allegedly going to Tennessee and Arkansas, fleeing when an accusation is being made against you. So anyway, that's the ruling right now, subject obviously to objections when the questions come out, is that the parents can and I'll give a limiting instruction that's hearsay, ladies and gentlemen. You can't consider it for the truth of the matter. You can only consider it for the effect it might have had, if any, on Christopher Gregor.
To elicit the testimony from them, from his father, that they made arrangements for it to come back.
You usually do this though by having some kind of documents. Like, here's the receipt from.
Oh, Judge, I'll go get the receipt. I don't have a problem with that. He came back. It's not like
I know,
anything.
but that's
But we're
the receipt for when he rented the car to come back. Those kind of things would be, because every time they're asked a specific question, they don't know an answer about when something happened, what day it was, what time it was. So the mom said she wasn't involved. Let me see what the dad said. Did he actually say he was involved or not involved?
He testified to the fact that he was involved with the renting of the car.
he made calls to get a rent car. Yeah, we had a, we thought it was Saturday afternoon or Saturday night, they made calls to get a rent a car, we had to get a car, and, but, I mean, the father's saying he made calls to get a rent a car, what's the state's position?
Judge, I guess in terms of our objection to the 104 hearing, or is it coming in as flight or?
I mean, at trial, what's the state's position on the father saying, I made calls on Saturday afternoon and or night to get him a rental car? Which, well, that doesn't make any sense anyway, because
Right.
his car seems till the 4th. But he said, what my notes are that
Mhm.
the dad was trying to get him to commit to come back. And that was on Saturday afternoon or evening. And then I guess after his car was taken, the dad made calls to get him a rental car. And then he says, the defendant returned to his house.
And I believe the testimony would be that the father had to do that because he didn't have, they took his wallet and they took his phone.
So what's the state's position on the father?
So it was on at 10:40 a.m. Your Honor, look, right. I mean, our big objections to the testimony today is, which we've already covered, was the threat. It was the classification as this being a threat. And then this threat now is moving towards different people and then somehow ultimately getting to the defendant. In regard to what the defense is going to put in regard to their reason for flight, then we really don't have much control over that. We know that there was a rental car this was done. We just pulled up the actual receipt. It looks like it was done on the 5th. So I'm just, I guess, a little bit confused by the father is basically saying that he's telling him to come home and then he's not really coming home. I don't know. Right?
The witness not being clear is not a reason
Right.
for me to bar them, but I find that I've allowed the state to introduce post-offense conduct, and I did a long opinion on the record yesterday about post-offense conduct, because I found it relevant, so relevant to consciousness of guilt. So the defense is allowed to present an explanation which would tend to, which could be that the defendant was going to come home on his own. So the fact that the father personally did that, he can't testify to what the rental car company was saying to him on the other end, but he can testify to the fact that he made calls to get a rental car. So I permit that testimony. That's still within the scope of the flight charge and the post-offense conduct that I allowed in on behalf of the state. Mr. Mitchell, anything else you want to bring in? All right, is the state satisfied you have some parameters as to the parent's testimony?
I'm sorry, Judge?
Is the state satisfied you have some parameters as to the parent's testimony?
Yeah, I mean, in regard to the father's testimony, the state would be objecting to any type that he's giving any type of personal opinion about things that are outside his personal knowledge. He clearly does not know or have personal knowledge about the court orders. He was talking about things, and then when on cross-examination, he admitted he really didn't know, or more, he didn't even understand. So we're gonna move to say that that isn't relevant because it's not firsthand knowledge. In regard to the threat, again, the state's objection to the testimony is the mother and father's classification that this is a threat when they have no firsthand knowledge as to what was even being said. So how is that witness under the court rules going to be able to testify to that? In regard to the specific,
Well, that's what I should rule on that part.
right, so in regard to the specific flight, again, the defense attorney is going to have the right to put in whatever flight he feels is appropriate for his case. So in terms of parameters, we feel that it should be to personal firsthand knowledge of what they know.
Right, so in terms of like the chronology, he
Right.
knows Corey's staying at his house, he knows Corey's staying at his house initially just overnight, and then been more than that, and he knows Corey's enrolled in school there. Those things are fine. I don't think he'd be testifying that his understanding of a legal custody arrangement as ordered by a judge or as ordered by DCP&D, he can testify as to his personal knowledge about what he sees, how often the grandchild's there, all those things. Now, obviously, that's just background, so it's not a long bit of testimony, but some background about the defendant being in the child's life and all those things are relevant.
I was under the impression that you had already questioned me about that, and I told you.
Right, no,
Yeah.
I brought up about some other things, but that was the Ms. Lanto brought up about the custody order. And then,
Judge, just as far as narrowing the scope, especially with Mrs. Gregor, just when she's going through things that she claims that she was aware of on 4-1 and 4-2, a lot of that was not firsthand knowledge. It was things the defendant was saying to her. So just object that that's
right, I think
admissible
she can
hearsay.
say that I got a call from Christopher and he said he was going to the hospital, because that's a present sense impression. She can say, I got a call or text, he was at the hospital. I don't think things like how Corey looks or all those things, that's not a present sense impression. That's all hearsay.
I'm sorry, Judge, I don't know.
No, it's a text message saying that
Okay.
Corey's
Right.
lethargic or sleepy or all those kind of things. Those aren't present sense impressions. Somebody says to you, if I'm on the phone with somebody and they say, hey, someone's knocking on my door right now, that's a present sense impression. Or I'm about to leave my house to go to the hospital, that's a present sense impression. But hearsay statements that describing how Corey's medical condition or something like that. All right, so then I would ask the state to be vigilant. If you're at all concerned, jump up, object, ask for a sidebar. If you think the parents are going to start testifying about things which we've ruled today are not appropriate, and I also believe Mr. Gallucci will instruct the witnesses to have
Absolutely.
answer the question that's answered. Answer the question that's asked in a factual manner without opinion testimony. Is there anything else we're going to do today?
Judge, do you want to address the motion that I made about if the defendant or Laura Powell should testify the information about the drug use? I brought the text messages for your honor to see.
I think I need to take a lunch break for the staff. I'm going to do that. So do you want to come back?
Sure,
Whatever the
Judge.
court prefers.
All right, want to come back with the lunch then?
We'll do whatever you ask him.
All right. But I need to give the staff and the officers a break. So if I went a little over thinking we weren't doing anything after this, but if you want to do that, yes, sure, we'll come back in an hour.
It might be brief, Judge, so I mean, we can do it whenever the court wants to. I have 2 exhibits for the court.
Well, come to the sidebar and let me see the exhibits.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing's brief. First time I've done that the whole trial. Rather than break for lunch, counsel asked for a sidebar conference regarding a notice of motion filed by the state on May 7, 2024. Specifically, the state sought to admit other conduct evidence against the defendant pursuant to evidence rule 404B, allegedly to show the defendant's conduct and state of mind on April 1, 2021. The evidence consists of some text message conversations which the court has been provided with and has reviewed between the defendant and another. One of the conversations actually goes back to March 30th, and then continues to April 1st. Ms. Strong, anything like to add?
Judge, the state submits that it meets the 4-part Caulfield test.
Thank you, Mr. Gallucci.
We disagree.
All right, so first, I find that the text messages have little relevance to the allegations against the defendant, assuming they have some tendency to prove or disprove any fact of consequence. It would be very minor, and the relevance and probative value would be substantially outweighed by the prejudice, which would be very difficult to overcome. Secondly, it's a totally separate kind of act. It's not similar to the offenses charged. Thirdly, there's no clear and convincing proof it actually happened. And finally, on the fourth prong, again, the prejudicial value substantially exceeds any type of probative value, would likely result in confusion of the issues and detraction from the facts in the case. That said, detention could be admissible if the defendant chose to testify, and if he specifically opened the door by making references contrary to the text messages, then perhaps the text message would be admissible for impeachment. If that would happen, then obviously both sides would be aware of it, and Mr. Galucci would counsel his client about it. But at this point, I find that the state's motion is denied without prejudice, subject to defendant opening the door if he chose to testify and chose to make self-serving statement to the contrary. So in that case, we don't need to come back to after lunch, correct?
Yes, Judge, thank you.
All right, so right now we're then going to be Wednesday.
Yes.
All right, so feel free to reach out if you have anything you need to address before that. You want to take this back?
Yes.
Oh, Judge, I'm sorry. I had dropped off of all the things we're gonna worry about. I had dropped off socks on Monday, because he's got no socks. And he still doesn't have them. So if there's anything going on, we can make sure he gets socks.
I'll ask the criminal manager to speak to Lieutenant Kettler at the jail and make sure that works out.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, everyone, for coming in today.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay, guys, thanks for watching day 6 with me. We are finally caught up. We are one day behind, which we like because we like to skip through breaks and lunches. So we'll do day 7 tomorrow, which they are doing right now. Today, the jury was not there. It was just his parents on the stand. The defense called them in. So please hit that like button, share, and subscribe if you haven't. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you later. Bye.